Ever heard of a military unit that actually wants to die in battle?
No, this isn't some sci-fi horror flick.
It's the Death Korps of Krieg from Warhammer 40K.
Buckle up, because today we're diving into the grim and fascinating world of these ultimate soldiers of sacrifice.
They're more than just shock troops, though.
The Death Korps offer a disturbingly fascinating glimpse into the Imperium's psyche.
Like, how can a society be shaped by unimaginable tragedy and pushed to the very extremes of human endurance?
Exactly.
You got a stack of intel here.
Codex entries,
Battle reports?
even some leaked recruitment files,
We're going to dissect what makes these guys tick.
how they came to be, and why even their allies within the Imperium give them a wide berth.
So, to really understand the Death Korps, you got to go back to their origin story.
It all begins with the planet Krieg, a once thriving hive world that made the fateful decision to rebel against the Imperium.
The infamous Krieg schism.
This wasn't your typical planetary uprising.
No, this rebellion went nuclear, literally.
Indeed, faced with overwhelming heresy, Colonel Jerton, commander of the 83rd Krieg Regiment, made a decision that would forever define his world.
He ordered a nuclear bombardment of his own planet to purge the rebellion.
Yes.
Talk about drastic measures. I can't even imagine making that call. Obliterating your own people to prove loyalty. It's a level of devotion that borders on madness.
Madness born from desperation, perhaps. But this event, known as the Purging, didn't just scar the planet, it scarred the very soul of its people. Krieg became a radioactive wasteland, forcing the survivors to live in underground bunkers, their world reduced to a toxic, bombed-out shell.
So they basically turned their home planet into a real-life Death World.
One of those notoriously hostile planets the Imperium is always struggling to conquer.
Talk about irony.
The irony is not lost on the Death Korps. They see themselves as living embodiments of that sin, their entire existence dedicated to atoning for the heresy of their ancestors.
So every battle, every sacrifice is another step toward redemption.
That's their mindset.
So it's not just blind fanaticism. There's a deeper motivation at play here.
There's a kind of inherited guilt driving them to these acts of self-destruction.
I see.
And that brings us to their most defining characteristic: a fanatical devotion to the Emperor and a willingness to die in his name.
That must unsettle even the most hardened veterans of the Imperial Guard.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just talk either.
No.
Their training is notoriously brutal.
Designed to weed out weakness and instill absolute obedience.
Think trench warfare in a nuclear winter.
Constant drills.
Live fire exercises with casualty rates that would make other regiments balk.
Survival is not the goal.
These soldiers are conditioned from birth to embrace death.
As the ultimate act of service to the Emperor.
Wow. Their training isn't about staying alive, it's about learning how to die effectively.
Their tactics on the battlefield reflect this mindset as well.
Wave after wave of soldiers charging into enemy fire, seemingly oblivious to the carnage around them.
They're masters of attrition warfare, siege specialists who just keep coming no matter the cost.
Attrition is the key word here. The Death Korps believe that any battle where their capacity to fight and die exceeds that of the enemy is a battle already won.
It's a grim calculus.
But one that has proven surprisingly effective.
Very.
It's unsettling, but you can't argue with results. They've turned entire wars around through sheer stubbornness and willingness to throw bodies at the problem.
And their reputation precedes them on the battlefield.
Even the orcs, notorious for their love of a good brawl.
They view the Death Korps with a mix of respect and apprehension.
Respect for their tenacity.
I imagine. But apprehension because they're basically fighting an army of the undead.
Soldiers who not only don't fear death, but welcome it.
Exactly. It's a psychological advantage that few enemies can counter.
Facing an enemy who doesn't flinch, who doesn't retreat, who keeps coming even after suffering horrendous losses. It's got to be enough to break the morale of even the most hardened veteran.
It is.
Okay, so we've established that they're more than just mindless zealots.
There's a twisted logic to their suicidal tactics.
But that logic doesn't make them any less unsettling to their allies.
Even within the Imperium, the Death Korps are viewed with a mixture of admiration and profound unease.
It's like, thanks for saving the day, but could you maybe tone down the whole death obsession a bit? It must make for some awkward battlefield collaborations. Their morbid habits, their lack of personal identity, their constant reminders of death, it all contributes to an atmosphere that's both inspiring and deeply disturbing to those fighting alongside them.
They actually carry memento mori with them.
Like little trinkets that symbolize death. Imagine trying to crack a joke in the trenches with a guy who's casually polishing a skull.
It's not exactly conducive to lighthearted banter.
Yeah.
And their stoicism, their unwavering focus on the mission, it can come across as cold and unfeeling to those who value camaraderie and individual expression.
So how do they even function within the larger Imperial military structure?
If they're so different, so unsettling to their allies, how do they manage to cooperate effectively on the battlefield?
Good question.
That's where the role of the commissar becomes crucial.
Perhaps even more so than in other Imperial regiments.
Yes.
The commissars, the Emperor's enforcers, those guys have a reputation for being pretty ruthless themselves.
Indeed. But with the Death Korps, their role goes beyond simply maintaining discipline.
It's about managing their fanaticism, ensuring their suicidal tendencies are directed towards achieving strategic objectives.
Right.
So they're like shepherds trying to herd a flock of rabid sheep, making sure all that death-seeking energy is pointed in the right direction.
An apt analogy.
It must be a delicate balancing act.
It is harnessing their zealotry without letting it run rampant.
They need to ensure the Death Korps are fighting for the Imperium's goals, not just their own personal desire for martyrdom.
Correct.
It must make for some tense command meetings.
I would imagine so.
All right, man, today's objective is to secure that hill, but try not to die too much in the process, okay?
The commissar's role highlights the inherent contradiction within the Death Korps. They're a force born from heresy, from the ultimate act of rebellion against the Imperium, yet they've become arguably the most fanatically loyal soldiers in the Emperor's service.
It's a fascinating paradox, isn't it? This cycle of sin and atonement playing out on a galactic scale.
They're trying to wash away the stain of their past with the blood of their enemies.
And ironically, their own blood as well.
Yes. And that, I think, is what makes the Death Korps so compelling.
So disturbing.
They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about the Imperium itself, about the price of survival, and the human cost of its endless wars.
So they're not just a curiosity, a bizarre footnote in the grim annals of the 41st millennium. They actually have something to tell us about the Imperium's soul.
About the dark underbelly of its ideology.
Okay, that's pretty heavy stuff. But before we get too existential, I want to talk about the practical side of things. What kind of gear do these guys use to wage their suicidal war?
Well, their equipment is as unique and as grim as their philosophy. It's a blend of practicality, durability, and a certain macabre aesthetic that sets them apart from other Imperial forces.
I'm picturing gas masks, trenches, lots of skulls. What's their signature look?
Think World War I German infantry, but crank up the Gothic, futuristic vibe. They favor function over flash, prioritizing protection and endurance in the most hostile environments imaginable.
Makes sense considering they're basically living in a nuclear wasteland.
What
About their weapons?
Do they have any special toys that play into their unique tactics?
Yeah.
Their standard issue lasgun, the Lucius pattern, is a good example.
Yeah.
It's known for its raw power, but also for draining its power pack quickly.
Sounds like a fitting weapon for a force that favors overwhelming firepower over sustained engagement.
Precisely. It's about delivering a decisive blow, even if it means burning out quickly.
Just like their tactics, it's a reflection of their embrace of sacrifice and their willingness to expend themselves in pursuit of victory.
And of course, we can't forget about those genetically engineered steeds.
Imagine a horse bred for war, able to survive on a toxic wasteland with biosculpted armor and a built-in drug injection system.
It's a testament to Krieg's ingenuity, but also to the Imperium's willingness to push the boundaries of biology in the name of war.
These steeds are as much a symbol of Krieg's resilience as they are of their grim determination.
So we've got suicidal tactics,
Unsettling allies.
grim equipment.
What about their actual organizational structure? How are these regiments structured? How do they fit into the larger Imperial Guard?
Well, they follow the standard Astra Militarum command structure for the most part. Companies,
Platoons.
squads, all led by officers who rose through the ranks, proving their worth through acts of valor.
And, of course, a complete disregard for personal safety.
But there's a key difference.
What's that?
Death Korps officers often lead from the front. They're not just barking orders from the rear. They're right there in the thick of it, dying alongside their men.
Leading by example is a core principle for them.
Death is an inevitability, and their leaders embrace it as readily as their troops.
It creates a sense of unity, but also contributes to their incredibly high casualty rates, even among the officer corps.
It's not just the rank and file who are expected to embrace death. Their leaders are right there with them, charging into the meat grinder. It's a level of commitment that's hard to fathom, even by the grim standards of the 41st millennium.
And that unwavering commitment is reflected in their battlefield performance. We talked about their tactics, their equipment, their mindset. But to truly understand their impact, we need to look at some specific regiments and the individuals who embody the Death Korps spirit.
I think that's a great idea.
All right, let's get into some specifics. Who are the poster boys for this death-obsessed fighting force?
Well, we can't talk about the Death Korps without revisiting the 83rd Krieg Infantry, the regiment that started it all. Led by the infamous Colonel Jerton, the man who made the fateful decision to nuke his own planet.
The architect of the purging. He's got to be a controversial figure, even by Death Korps standards.
He's viewed as both a hero and a monster.
A tragic figure who sacrificed everything, including his own world, to preserve the Imperium. His decision, while undeniably horrific, shaped the Death Korps into what they are today.
His legacy lives on in every gas mask-clad soldier who marches out of Krieg.
A constant reminder of the sacrifices they're expected to make.
Speaking of legacies, there's another figure who perfectly embodies the Death Korps spirit. Marshal Karis Venner, known as the Thrice Martyred.
Thrice martyred. That's got to be some kind of record even in the 41st millennium.
Venner led the 17th Line Corps for 11 years, always from the front lines. He's been reported dead on multiple occasions, only to reappear leading the charge even after suffering horrific wounds.
Sounds like he's got a serious case of plot armor. Or maybe he just embodies the Death Korps' uncanny ability to shrug off injuries that would kill a normal man.
There are stories of him leading a ragtag group of survivors out of certain death, surrounded by enemy corpses, his own body riddled with shrapnel and burns. He's become a living legend.
Revered by his troops.
But also feared by those who see him as a harbinger of doom.
He sounds like the Grim Reaper himself, leading his skeletal legions across the battlefield. It's a powerful image, but also a disturbing one.
His story highlights the fine line the Death Korps walk between heroism and fanaticism.
They're capable of incredible feats.
But at a cost that many find unsettling, even within the Imperium.
So we've got the architect of their world's destruction and the unkillable marshal. What other characters populate this grim tapestry?
Well, there are countless other individuals and regiments, each with their own stories of grim determination and unwavering sacrifice. The tapestry is woven with threads of blood and iron, each telling a tale of both individual heroism and collective tragedy.
It's a lot to take in. These guys are intense. But I'm starting to see the bigger picture here. They're not just shock troops. They're a reflection of the Imperium's soul.
Precisely. The Death Korps' impact on the Imperium is undeniable.
They're basically the Imperium's go-to guys for the worst of the worst.
Right. The suicide missions.
The meat grinder fronts that would make other soldiers turn and run.
Precisely, think toxic wastelands.
Demon-infested planets.
The front lines against the Tyrannid hive fleets.
The Death Korps are always there, ready to die for the Emperor, no matter how horrific the circumstances.
It's almost like they're seeking out those death worlds.
Drawn to the most hostile environments imaginable.
Like they're trying to outdo their own home planet in terms of sheer grimness.
Their unwavering dedication and tolerance for casualties make them a valuable asset in those conflicts.
They're the hammer the Imperium uses to bludgeon its enemies into submission. Consequences be damned.
And speaking of consequences, their recruitment and training must be something else.
How do you create a soldier who not only accepts death, but actively seeks it out?
It's as brutal as you'd expect.
A process designed to strip away individuality and forge them into instruments of the Emperor's will.
From practically the moment they're born, these soldiers are conditioned for war.
The planet's harsh environment, the indoctrination.
It's all part of creating the ultimate killing machine.
Their training takes place amidst the ruins of their nuked-out cities. Imagine recruits clearing minefields, digging trenches, and fighting mock battles in a radioactive wasteland where every breath could be their last.
It's not just physical toughness, though, right?
It's about breaking them, mentally rebuilding them with absolute devotion to the Emperor and zero regard for self-preservation.
Exactly. It's dehumanizing.
But undeniably effective.
These soldiers emerge from training as empty vessels, ready to be filled with the Emperor's will and nothing else.
So how does this translate to the battlefield?
How do the Death Korps actually fight?
Well, their tactical doctrine is based on overwhelming force and a complete disregard for casualties.
They believe that any battle where they can outlast the enemy in terms of sheer willingness to die is a battle already won.
It's a chillingly simple equation.
Their commanders are ruthless, often sacrificing entire companies to gain a strategic advantage.
Or simply to wear down the enemy's resolve.
Their soldiers charge headlong into enemy fire, their only concern being to take as many of the enemy with them as possible. It's not subtle, but it's effective.
They're masters of siege warfare.
Digging in.
Enduring relentless bombardment.
And then launching wave after wave of attacks until the enemy is either overrun or simply collapses from exhaustion.
It's like a tide of great-clad death.
Slowly but inexorably eroding the enemy's defenses until nothing is left but a sea of corpses.
And that's precisely the image they want to project. Their reputation precedes them, striking fear into the hearts of their enemies. Even the orcs, who revel in brutal combat, have a grudging respect for the Death Korps' tenacity.
And their allies, while often unsettled by their methods, have come to rely on their unwavering commitment.
They know that if the Death Korps are deployed,
They will hold the line.
no matter the cost.
They're the bedrock upon which many Imperial offensives are built.
They hold the line, allowing other regiments to maneuver and exploit weaknesses in the enemy's defenses.
But their impact goes beyond the battlefield, doesn't it?
I think so.
The Death Korps raise some fundamental questions about the Imperium itself, about the nature of sacrifice and the value of individual life.
Indeed. In a galaxy where humanity is constantly under threat,
Where survival is a daily struggle.
where billions die every day, the Death Korps offer a different perspective.
They ask, what if death isn't something to be feared, but rather a means to an end?
What if the individual is meaningless and only the collective, the Imperium, truly matters?
It's a chilling thought.
But one that's deeply ingrained in the Death Korps psyche. And as their numbers grow, as they're deployed to more and more war zones, their influence on the Imperium's culture can't be ignored.
Some see them as heroes,
The ultimate patriots.
willing to give everything for the Emperor and the survival of humanity.
Others see them as fanatics, a dangerous symptom of the Imperium's increasingly desperate struggle for survival.
But whatever one's opinion of them, the Death Korps of Krieg are a force to be reckoned with,
A testament to the enduring power of faith.
even when twisted into something dark and unsettling.
All right, so we've talked about their philosophy,
Their training.
their impact.
Let's dive into some specific examples of Death Korps regiments and campaigns to really see how all of this plays out on the galactic stage.
Excellent suggestion. Let's revisit the 83rd Krieg Infantry, the regiment that started it all. Their legacy lives on, not just as a historical footnote, but as an active fighting force inspiring generations of Death Korps soldiers.
They fought in countless campaigns, earning numerous battle honors, and their reputation for unwavering tenacity remains undiminished.
Then there's the 186th Krieg Infantry, a regiment shrouded in controversy for their actions on the planet Hieronymus Theta.
Ah, yes, the incident where their colonel executed the planetary governor for trying to negotiate with the Necrons. Talk about a hardline stance against diplomacy.
Their actions sparked outrage even among some within the Imperium.
But it also highlights the Death Korps' uncompromising nature. To them, compromise is weakness, and any attempt to negotiate with the enemy is seen as a betrayal of the Emperor's will.
It shows how deeply ingrained their ideology is, how far removed they are from the political realities that govern the rest of the Imperium.
And of course, we have countless other regiments, each with its own story of grim determination and unwavering sacrifice. The 134th Krieg Heavy Infantry, for example, are known for their expertise in urban warfare.
Turning bombed-out cityscapes into kill zones that favor their attrition-based tactics.
And the 138th Krieg Mechanized Infantry,
Masters of lightning strikes and flanking maneuvers.
exploiting their enemy's hesitation to engage a force that seems to welcome death.
And let's not forget the Death Riders,
The Cavalry of Krieg.
mounted on those bioengineered steeds we discussed earlier.
They're a terrifying sight to behold, charging into battle with lances tipped with explosives, a whirlwind of death and steel.
These regiments have fought in some of the most brutal conflicts the galaxy has ever seen.
The Siege of Rax, for example.
A 17-year-long meat grinder against chaos forces.
The Death Korps were instrumental in that victory, holding the line against impossible odds, enduring unimaginable horrors, and ultimately grinding the enemy down through sheer attrition.
And then there's the Orphan War, a desperate struggle against the Necrons, a foe as relentless and emotionless as the Death Korps themselves.
It was Clash of Titans, a war of attrition that pushed both sides to their limits. The Death Korps, led by the legendary Marshal Venner, were instrumental in holding back the Necron tide, but at a terrible cost.
Their actions in that conflict solidified their reputation as the ultimate soldiers of sacrifice, willing to give everything for the Emperor.
Even their very souls.
And their legacy continues to grow as they're deployed to ever more dangerous war zones, facing ever more terrifying foes.
They're the shield that protects the Imperium from the darkness. A shield forged in the fires of nuclear annihilation and tempered in the blood of countless battles.
Their story is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, but also a cautionary tale about the dangers of fanaticism and the high cost of endless war.
It's a lot to process. They're heroes. They're fanatics. They're disturbing. They're inspiring. It's hard to pin them down.
And that's what makes them so fascinating. They defy easy categorization. They're a complex and multifaceted force with a rich and often contradictory history.
Okay, so they're more than just mindless killing machines. There's depth there, complexity.
Mm.
But how much depth can there be in a soldier who's conditioned from birth to embrace death?
That's where things get really interesting. There are hints in the source material that suggest a surprising level of depth beneath that grim exterior, a flicker of something more than just blind obedience.
Really? I'm intrigued. Let's unpack that. So we've got these soldiers bred for war, literally born into a society that glorifies death, but you're saying there's more to them than meets the eye.
It's not just about blind obedience.
No.
Their faith, for example,
Right.
it runs deeper.
Than just following orders.
Remember, their entire existence is framed as atonement for the sins of their forefathers.
Every battle, every sacrifice is a step towards cleansing that original stain.
Yes.
So it's guilt that fuels their fanaticism.
A desperate need to redeem themselves in the eyes of the emperor.
I see.
And that suggests a level of self-awareness,
Ah.
of internal conflict that we don't often associate with the Death Korps.
So they're not just mindless automatons.
They're grappling with a profound spiritual burden.
It's a twisted kind of faith, for sure. But it adds a layer of complexity to their motivations. What else hints at this hidden depth?
Well, there's an interesting anecdote about the Death Rider selection process.
Okay.
These elite cavalry units are not just chosen for their skill in the saddle.
What else is there? I figured with this whole death cult thing, they just pick the biggest, meanest guys.
They actually look for recruits who demonstrate independent thinking and initiative, qualities you wouldn't necessarily expect in a force that prizes uniformity and obedience.
That's surprising.
So even within this culture of self-sacrifice, there's a need for individuals who can think for themselves, adapt to changing circumstances.
It makes sense when you think about it. A force composed entirely of mindless drones wouldn't be very effective in the long run, especially in the chaotic battles of the 41st millennium.
Right.
So they need that balance, the fanaticism tempered with a bit of tactical flexibility.
And let's not forget the role of the commissars.
Right.
If the Death Korps were truly just mindless killing machines, there'd be no need for them.
Yeah, I guess they need someone to point those killing machines in the right direction. Though it's hard to imagine having to restrain a soldier who's eager to die.
The very fact that commissars are needed suggests that the Death Korps are capable of independent thought, of questioning orders.
Even if it's ultimately suppressed.
Exactly.
So there's a flicker of free will in there somewhere, buried beneath layers of indoctrination and societal pressure.
Which makes their story all the more tragic.
How so?
These aren't mindless robots. They're thinking, feeling beings who have chosen this path of self-annihilation
It's a chilling thought.
to willingly surrender your individuality
Your very life.
to a cause that demands such absolute sacrifice.
And it raises some profoundly unsettling questions about the Imperium itself.
Like what?
Well, if a society like the Death Korps can not only exist but thrives within the Imperium, what does that say about the state of humanity in the 41st millennium?
Are they a necessary evil, a product of the Imperium's desperation?
Or are they a symptom of something far more insidious, a rod that goes to the very core of its ideology?
The Death Korps are a mirror reflecting the Imperium's own warped image back at itself.
They force us to confront the dark underbelly of its fanaticism.
The human cost of its endless wars.
So the Death Korps of Krieg, they're more than just grim faces and suicidal charges.
They're a window into the soul of the Imperium, a glimpse into the darkness that lurks at the heart of humanity's fight for survival.
And that darkness, the willingness to sacrifice everything, even our very humanity, in the name of survival, that's the truly chilling thought.
It makes you wonder, if the Emperor's victory ever comes, will it be worth the cost?
Will there be anything left of humanity to celebrate that victory?
Perhaps that's the question we should all be asking ourselves, not just about the Death Korps, but about the Imperium as a whole.
Is this endless cycle of war and sacrifice truly the only path to survival? Or is there another way, a path that doesn't require us to surrender our very souls to the darkness?
It's something to think about.
Heavy stuff indeed. Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the Death Korps of Krieg.
Yeah,
I hope you found it as fascinating and thought-provoking as I did.
me too.
For our listeners out there, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Are the Death Korps heroes, villains, or something in between? Leave us a comment and let us know what you think. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring the dark corners of the 41st millennium.